History remembers Genghis Khan as a warrior, but it forgets to whisper what truly happened when the battles ended. He didn't just conquer empires, he conquered generations. Behind every city that fell, behind every victory, there was a darkness that history buried beneath golden legends. His army wasn't the only thing people feared. What came after the war was far worse. He turned women into weapons, wombs into tools of legacy, and desire into a system of domination. Entire bloodlines were rewritten by his will. Cities were erased not only by fire and steel, but by the silence of shame. What began as conquest ended as control over the most intimate part of human existence. This is the side of Genghis Khan no one glorifies, a hidden empire built not just on blood, but on fear that crept into bedrooms, homes, and generations. Once his banners appeared on the horizon, death wasn't the only fate people feared. It was what came after every conquest under Genghis Khan began with a single brutal command: erase the men. When the Mongol banners rose above a city's walls, its fate was already sealed. The first to fall were not the buildings, but the bloodlines. Men, whether warriors, nobles, scholars, or farmers, were cut down where they stood. There was no negotiation, no mercy, no survival for those who could fight back or carry a family name. This wasn't a chaotic slaughter. It was methodical, the cold arithmetic of empire. By wiping out the male population, Genghis Khan didn't just win battles. He uprooted the entire foundation of a people. The fathers, brothers, sons, protectors, leaders, that gone in a single night. And with them, the very future of the conquered bloodline. Persian chronicler Ata Malik Juvaini described these moments in chilling simplicity. They slew the men, they took the women, and the world grew silent. Imagine it. A city that once roared with life now reduced to the echo of footsteps on empty streets. Women clutching their children, staring at the fires consuming their world, knowing that the men who would have fought for them were already buried beneath the ashes. For the Mongols, this was not cruelty for cruelty's sake. This was strategy, a system designed to make rebellion impossible before it could ever be born. No men meant no armies. No heirs meant no future resistance. And what remained after the slaughter were the living spoils of war. Women and children. They weren't just captives. They were currency, trophies, and tools of control, distributed among soldiers, given to commanders, and absorbed into Mongol households. A conquered people's identity was not only taken, it was dismantled piece by piece. With every city they crushed, the Mongols didn't just conquer territory. They erased generations. The fall of a city wasn't the end of a war. It was the beginning of something far darker, the rewriting of human bloodlines. Behind every Mongol conquest, hidden in the shadow of blood and fire, was a law, one that didn't live on paper, but in flesh. Genghis Khan's legendary legal code, the Yasa, was more than just a set of rules. It was the invisible hand that controlled every breath inside the empire. Unlike the laws of kingdoms and empires that came before, the Yasa wasn't written on stone tablets or carved into royal walls. It was secret, whispered only among the Khan and his inner circle. But its reach was absolute. It governed not just war, not just taxes, but the most personal corners of human life: sex, marriage, and power over women. Under the Yasa, women were not partners. They were property. Wives, concubines, and widows could be inherited, traded, or gifted like livestock or land. When a man died, his surviving wives didn't inherit his wealth. They were part of it. Passed down to sons, given to generals, or folded into the Khan's personal harem. Consent didn't matter. A woman's voice held no weight against the Yasa. The law existed to protect male power, and at its highest peak, that meant protecting the power of Genghis Khan himself. Among the ruling elite, women became pawns on a vast chessboard of power. They were used to forge alliances, seal loyalty, or reward conquest. A noble woman could be married off to secure a tribe's obedience, or taken as a prize to erase her lineage completely. Breaking the Yasa, questioning this structure, meant one thing: death. There was no room for rebellion, not even in the private chamber. And yet, this system was not presented as cruelty. To the Mongol elite, it was law, sacred, unquestionable, wrapped in the language of order and discipline. But beneath the surface, it was nothing less than institutionalized control, a structure where women's bodies became legal currency and bloodlines were manipulated like a weapon. This wasn't love. This wasn't culture. This was power disguised as law. In the beating heart of Genghis Khan's empire, where battles ended and crowns fell, stood a silent, moving fortress, the Ordo. This wasn't an ordinary palace. It was a mobile royal machine, a traveling seat of power wrapped in silk, guarded by the deadliest warriors of the steppe. Inside the Ordo, politics and desire were woven together like threads in a web. Genghis Khan kept multiple wives, each one carefully chosen through strategy, not affection. Every marriage was a calculated alliance, a way to absorb kingdoms, tribes, and power into his bloodline. But beyond these royal unions lay something darker. Hundreds of concubines filled the Khan's private world. They came from cities that no longer existed, from royal families that had been crushed under Mongol boots. Khwarezm, China, Persia, Central Asia. Noble daughters, queens, and maidens were seized, stripped of titles, and marched into the royal camp. Once they entered the Ordo, they belonged to the Khan. But this wasn't chaos. It was an organized system. Wives were ranked by status. The great empress at the top, followed by secondary wives, then the concubines. Every woman was catalogued, recorded, and assigned a place within the imperial structure. They were not treated as individuals. They were assets. Their bodies, tools for forging bloodlines, heirs, and political control. For many, beauty itself became a curse. The more radiant, the higher the chance of being chosen, not for love, but for captivity. To be chosen meant living in silk and gold, but also behind invisible walls of obedience. A single glance could decide their fate. Refusal wasn't an option. Their names rarely survived the ink of history. Their voices were erased. All that remained was the legacy of one man, the great Khan. His bloodline expanded, generation after generation, while theirs dissolved into silence. The Ordo wasn't a palace. It was a machine of power, built on conquest, fueled by fear, and maintained through the bodies of the forgotten. In the Mongol Empire, sexual violence wasn't a crime of passion. It was a weapon. It was as calculated as a siege, as cold as a drawn blade, and as effective as an army of thousands. When the cities of Bukhara, Nishapur, Merv, and countless others fell, the bloodshed didn't end with the last swing of a sword. That was only the beginning. After the walls were breached and the men were slaughtered, a different kind of war began. One waged on the bodies of women. Women and girls were paraded before Mongol commanders, judged like spoils of war. Some were chosen and handed over to high-ranking officers. Others were distributed among the soldiers as rewards for loyalty and brutality. Those considered beautiful or noble were sent deep into the empire, where they would live out the rest of their lives as concubines or slaves in palaces far from their homeland. This violence wasn't random or chaotic. It was psychological warfare. By violating a city's women, the Mongols didn't just break individuals, they shattered entire communities. It humiliated the men who had once stood as protectors, erased family lineages, and burned cultural pride to ash. This cruelty sent a message that was louder than any trumpet. Your walls cannot protect you. Your gods will not save you. Your daughters now belong to us. For Genghis Khan, domination wasn't just about territory or power. It was about control of the human spirit. Cities were conquered with swords, but empires were built on fear. And that fear lived long after the battlefields fell silent. Behind the glory of conquest lay a truth history often whispers but rarely shouts. An empire raised not only on blood, but on broken bodies and stolen futures. Centuries after Genghis Khan's death, his shadow still moves quietly through the veins of millions. Modern genetic research has revealed a staggering truth. Nearly 16 million men across Central Asia carry a Y chromosome that traces directly back to a single man, Genghis Khan. This isn't legend. This is science. A biological footprint left by a conquest that was as personal as it was political. Genghis Khan didn't just build an empire with armies. He engineered one with blood. His sexual dominance, backed by law and power, turned reproduction into a weapon. Through wives, concubines, and forced unions, his lineage spread far beyond the borders of Mongolia, into Persia, Central Asia, Eastern Europe, and China. Every child born under that shadow wasn't just an heir to his blood. but to his legacy of control. What began in the windswept steppes of Mongolia became a genetic empire, still alive in the DNA of millions today. This is the part of history that cannot be erased, because it lives inside human blood itself. History often remembers Genghis Khan as a conqueror, a brilliant strategist who united the steppes and forged the largest contiguous empire the world had ever seen. But empires are not built on strategy alone. They're built on blood, silence, and the shattered lives of those who had no voice. Behind the shining armor and glorious victories was a shadow, a machine of domination that controlled not just lands, but people, bodies, and entire bloodlines. His power didn't end with battles. It lingered through fear, through law, through generations born into a legacy they never chose. These are not tales to glorify. These are warnings etched into history, reminders that the greatest empires often carry their darkest truths hidden beneath their crowns. And centuries later, the world still lives in the shadow of that legend.